Welcome to our Lunch and Learn Operations series. I am Kathleen Thompson, and I'm here with Steve Mahoney. This is the third of 4 sessions that you can see on the screen. Today's session is about conquering your important work, getting it done. And I encourage you to sign up for the 4th session if you haven't already. Now, in the first 2 sessions we had earlier last week, we talked about a lot related to goals. The first was about vision and what change you'd like to help bring about in the world, kind of your big picture. And I talked about Charity Water, whose vision is to bring clean drinking water to every village in the world. And then we talked about goals to further that vision. And if you were there, you heard about SMART C goals, not just plain old SMART goals, but SMART C goals, which are compelling and controllable. Out of goals came projects and tasks. And then on Wednesday, you heard about how to manage bigger projects with multiple people or stretching out over a long period of time. And if you missed either of last week's sessions, you can go back and watch them on our YouTube channel. And today we're talking about how to actually get what matters to you done. Because a plan is great, but you actually have to do the plan. And a lot of us can come up with a fantastic plan and then somehow the work doesn't get done. And why is that? Well, there's often more than one reason. Sometimes we need to develop skill or discipline, and sometimes it's our own human nature. And we're going to talk about that today. Because in the end, your idea doesn't matter, your vision doesn't matter, your goals don't matter, even project planning doesn't matter if you don't execute on your idea or vision or goals or project. So let's start with the first question. How do I know what's most important? In fact, somebody asked that question at the project planning meeting the other day. So I thought it would be helpful to define what we mean by important. And so I want to keep it as simple as possible and say, whatever is most likely, in your opinion, to move your business toward your goals and vision is what's most important. Now, some things that are important are urgent. They're pressing needs. I have to do this by today or else something bad's going to happen. I have to file my taxes. I have to pay my payroll. But other important things might be an investment that pays off in 5 or more years, like starting a college savings fund for a newborn baby. So what I want to do is give you a couple of tools to help you figure out what's most important to you. And the first one is something that I showed at last week's workshop. And this is the evaluation tool. This is one way to determine what's most important. It's not the only way, but it's one way. It's one way to figure out what's the highest priority to you. And this is where you look at all your options and you evaluate them based on the effort it will take, the impact it will have on your business, the cost, and the time. And you assign numbers to each of those based on what you believe is true. And again, it's just an estimate. And the more experience you have at your business, the better you will get at estimating. So the low number is better. And in the case of impact, the higher the impact, the low number. In the case of effort, a low number is also better. So the less effort, the lower the number. So it depends on what it is. Impact being better is smaller, or more is smaller number, and effort, cost, and time, less is a smaller number. So they're kind of backwards to each other. Because what you want to do is, after you've evaluated each one of those, you come up with a total and you look at the ones with the lowest numbers, and those are the ones that you have deemed as most important for you and your business. Now, if you don't want to use an analytical tool like this, you can go in 2 different directions, super simple or sophisticated. Now, the super simple version is just decide for yourself. just take a list of whatever it is you want to work on, whether it's be a project or a bunch of tasks, and rank them A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3. And then put them down somewhere on paper, on your computer, or whatever, wherever you normally put stuff that you're going to look at and remember, and just list everything in relative order. Now, secondarily, if you want to go more sophisticated, there are a whole bunch of analytical tools on the internet that have more criteria than these 4 and that actually weight them. And one methodology that I was trained in that's called Six Sigma has a couple of tools like this. One is called the value stream mapping, and another one is called the 5 Why system. And if you Google those, you'll get more information about how they work. But there's another Six Sigma tool that I have used most often, and I'm going to show you that on my screen next. This is called a Pew matrix. It's probably named after somebody named Pew. I really don't remember because that was a long time ago that I took the training. But the way this works is that this has weighted criteria. And what you want to do is when you need to make a decision about something, about what's the best option for you or what's the most important for you, this is really looking for the one best as opposed to ranking things. So in other words, if I say, I only have time for one project in 2024, what's it going to be? This is where you would use something like this. Or I have to make a decision, am I going to go with vendor A or vendor B to help me with my project? Something like that. What you do is you come up with what your most important criteria are, and you put them at the top of the screen where it says important criteria. And then you weight them. You can weight them with any scale you want. You could weight them 1 to 5. You could have only 1s, 3s, and 5s and skip the 2 and 4. You could go higher than 5. You could go 1, 5, 7. That's a common one so that it really makes you commit to what's most important. You could just list the criteria and give each one a random weight that has no scale involved and just it's relative to each other. It's totally up to you. And then you list other criteria that aren't so important down below. And they all get a weight of 1 because they don't matter as much. They matter to you kind of, but not really that much. And so then what you do is you say, if my ideal would be that an option would have the maximum score for every category. And if I did, what would it total? So if I had 3 important criteria, for example, and one had a weight of 2 and one had a weight of 3 and the other one had a weight of 5, then my maximum would be 10. And then if I had 3 other criteria, each getting a 1, then that totals 3. And then, so I have a grand total of points of 13. Then what you do is you look at your options. Now that you've got your importance decided in advance, before you look at any options, now you look at your options and you say to yourself, okay, here's choice number 1. How does it rate on this scale, on these 3 criteria at the top? Is it better? Is it better than another one? Or is it worse than another one? And so you just say, is it better or is it worse? So for example, if I have option 1 and I say the first criteria is, like, let's say I either do marketing to new customers or try to increase my sales to existing customers. And I list the criteria. Like 1 would be, has the potential for high sales growth. And the weight I give it is 5. So when I look at marketing to new customers and I say, does that have the possibility of 5? If so, I give it the 5, which is the maximum weight. If I say, I don't think this option really is a 5, I think this option is less good than a 5, then I might give it a 3 or a 4 or a 2 or whatever I think the number is. And so in this case, what you do is after you've ranked one option by the criteria and it gets a score, then you rank the second option by the criteria and it gets a score. And if you have 3 options, you rank the third one by the criteria and it gets a score. Now, what I would expect is that probably none of the options are going to have as good of a score as the possible maximum. So say option 1, if your maximum at the top was a 10, and your first option had a 7, and your second option had an 8, and your third option had a 4, clearly option 3 is out. Then what you have to ask yourself is either of those 2 options good enough for me to go with it? Is an 8 for option 2 close enough to a 10 for me to attempt it? And if so, then I'll go with it. And if not, not so much. So you always reserve the right to choose no options and come up with something else. And that's the beauty of this matrix, as opposed to the one before it, which was choosing out of 4 choices. So in that case, where I had an 8 was the lowest score, I'm assuming I'm going to do the one that's an 8, even if it's possible that an 8 isn't good enough and I really needed a 4 in order to make it worth my while. This one gives you that comparison against what we call the maximum or the ideal, to say, well, okay, so 8 out of 10, that's pretty good. That's 80%. That's close enough. I'm going to go with it. You can Google Pew Matrix if you want to learn more about how to do these, and you'll get a lot more information than what I just gave you. That's kind of an overview as to how that works. Now, once you have your most important priorities, now is when you list them and you decide which ones you're going to do. So now you start getting into more details. And now you're going to put them in order. So if I decided that in this case, I was going to increase sales to existing customers and I was going to create a new product line, I listed everything that I'd have to do in order to create that product line. I decided my priority order, and then you can see that I even numbered them in the order that I'm going to do them. Now, you don't have to be this sophisticated, but this is one possible way as how you can put the projects, the priorities, and the tasks together to have a list. Now, if you wanted to go the super simple method, which is what I said before you could do, it could look something like this. I had my high level stuff that I wanted to accomplish on the left side, 1 through 4, and then I simply schedule my activities on the calendar or the planner. And so you can see that I scheduled certain tasks that related to these higher level activities so that I knew I was going to get them done. And so if you want to go simple, if you want to go complicated, do it this way. If you want to go simple, do it this way. So that's great. So now I have my tasks identified. I have my plan in place, and now it's time to get working. And I start out great. I'm all fired up, and then what? Now I get to the messy middle where projects often go to die. And why do we not do what we say we're going to do, even when we put it on our calendar? Well, there's a lot of reasons. And a big one is that oftentimes what we say we're going to do isn't urgent. And we get caught up in urgent. Whether it's important or not, it's urgent. And so urgent becomes a habit. We get used to reacting. And the problem with reacting to what's urgent is that oftentimes what's urgent is someone else's idea of what's urgent and isn't necessarily ours. It might not even be important to the future of our business. It simply feels urgent. And then we get caught up in that cycle and it just becomes habitual. And so one thing we can do to help that is establishing boundaries and focusing on our compelling goals that are important to us. Now, one tool you can use to combat the tyranny of the urgent is the Eisenhower Method. Now, you can start by using this method to evaluate what you actually spend time on. And you can ask yourself the question. You can see there are 4 quadrants. How much of what I'm doing is important and urgent, which is quadrant 1? How much is important and not urgent, which is quadrant 2? How much is urgent and yet not important? That's in quadrant 3. And how much is neither urgent nor important? It's just busy work and it seems fun, or it's a way to pass the time, or it makes me feel like I did something when actually I wasn't doing all that much. How much of my time is spent doing that? We're meant to spend the majority of our time on the upper half of this chart, the things that have the green check mark. Important, urgent, and important, not urgent. What we often spend our time on is the stuff on the right, which is important, urgent, and non-important, urgent, for reasons that I described just a minute ago. And then some of us, because we just want to feel like we're accomplishing something, spend more time in quadrant 4 than we should, which really is 0, but that's humanly impossible. So let's just say 0 is not really going to happen, but let's try to minimize it as much as possible, which is why it says eliminate. So our goal is, after we look at how we're actually spending our time, is to try and shift how we're spending our time from the right-hand side or the bottom to the top of this chart. And the more we do that, the more we are building and investing toward what's going to be good for our business and ultimately good for our customers in the long run. Because what gets cheated is the stuff in quadrant 2, which says schedule it. And that's where our long-term projects are usually found. So what gets scheduled is more likely to get done. So what you want to do is, after you do your initial review of how you're actually spending your time, you want to schedule/budget the time to spend in the upper 2 quadrants and actually put it on your calendar or list out the tasks and put them in the priority order, and then do a regular review to see how well those things that aren't urgent and yet are important are getting done, or if they're constantly being pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. So that's all great. But what if it's still not getting done? Now we're going to go a little deeper. Now, again, you want to look how you're spending time. And how can we be more efficient with the time we have? Now, a lot of efficiency things are not helpful. They try to treat humans as if we're not human. So what we want to do is think of efficiency as ways to work with how our brain naturally operates anyway and go with it. So for example, our brains kind of get into a groove of how they want to operate or how they're used to operating. If you do creative work like writing or composing or art or whatever it happens to be, that work is a lot different from editing, reading emails, or say recording video or a podcast. And it's hard for us to jump from one to the next because our brain gets kind of in a groove and it likes it. So I like doing this, I'm used to it now, and doing something else can feel jarring. So it's like, let's just go with that. Let's use that to our advantage by creating blocks of time for different types of work. Some people do all their podcast recording on one day. Some people write for 2 hours and then take a break and then move on to something else. Because once you take a break, it's easier to shift gears. One business owner I know does all her admin and cleanup work on Fridays. Another does all their interviews on Thursdays because their mind is on that engagement with somebody else. And it's hard for them to shift gears if they do one and then they try to go do something else, like write something, a blog post. So you can look at the types of activities you have that you normally do, and you can group them and then schedule them together so that you do them in a chunk of time. If you do this, don't forget to schedule breaks, because you need to give your body and your mind and your creativity and even your eyes a rest. So take a walk, do some squats, make tea, do something else for 5 minutes, an hour, and then take longer breaks every so often. And there's a method called the Pomodoro Method that is helpful to explain how this break taking works to your benefit. And you're going to get a list of resources with this replay. And in that will be a link that explains how to use the Pomodoro Method. Another way to look at this, to be more efficient with your time, is to ask yourself, what time of day am I most likely to accomplish certain types of tasks? Dan Pink wrote a book called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing about this very topic. And what he found for most people is this: they're best at high achievement tasks that require go, go, go at the beginning of the day. Before lunch and right after lunch, admin tasks are most beneficial because it doesn't require quite as much brain power. And mid to late afternoon can be best for creative work because our minds are more open then. We're not in as much of a rush to be a go-getter. Now, if your business is a side hustle, which a surprisingly small percentage of you said that, or you're raising children or taking care of a loved one, you probably don't have those chunks of time, big, huge chunks of time. You may only have snatches of time. So if that's your situation, the key here is to break your tasks up into even smaller pieces. And now it feels counterintuitive because you end up with a bigger list. But if you can find things you can get done in about 15 minutes or less, you can just choose to do one of those 15-minute tasks when you have a couple minutes. And then what happens is you go, oh, that worked. I was successful. And success builds momentum. Okay, so we talked about prioritization. We talked about efficiency, but efficiency isn't everything. There are other reasons why we don't get the important stuff done. The first one is distractions. Now, there are all kinds of distractions. The first distraction is people. If we are working in an office where other people can come in and we have an open door policy, that can be a distraction. People might call us on the phone. We might have meetings that break up our time. The best way to handle those types of distractions are to set boundaries and keep them unless it's an emergency. So set aside time for meetings that aren't in the middle of when you are best getting work done. Don't answer the telephone at certain times of the day that you've blocked off to get work done. Don't have an open door policy all day. Say office hours are XYZ. Train people who think everything's an emergency that it's not necessarily, and teach them what an emergency actually is. And then when it comes to email, which is another form of distraction, you can schedule when you're going to review those emails, and you can shut off the notification windows or chimes so you don't get constantly interrupted by email. Now, the third type of distraction are those that are self-initiated. Our phone is the biggest one. It's often sitting right next to us. We can see it when a notification pops up. And we'll also, for many of us who do creative work, It's amazing how when we sit down to do our creative work, we suddenly have to clean our desk or take out the trash or Google something that comes to mind. The average American worker distracts themselves every 11 minutes. And with every interruption, you lose 20% of productivity just trying to get your brain back to where it left off. So for every hour you spend working, you only have 45 minutes of production. And if you schedule 6 hours in your workday, leaving the rest open for disruptions, surprises, disasters, or admin work, you're actually only working for 4.5 hours of your 8-hour workday, which could go a long way to explaining why things don't get done. But that's not all. Now we're going to go even deeper. The first is maybe there's a story that we're telling ourselves, like, no one in my family has ever done anything like this. What makes me think I can? Or this is hard and it's always going to be hard. It's forever hard. Why is that always hard? Or this should be easy. I must be doing something wrong. Or I've got writer's block, artist block, whatever block. The second reason that goes deeper, that we don't get things done, can be fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, or even fear of success. We might say to ourselves, and not even do this consciously, it's all down deep, if I fail, I'm never going to live it down. If I'm rejected, I'm not going to survive, because my brain remembers the tribal time 10,000 years ago when if I got rejected, I was kicked out of the tribe and I had to survive on my own, and I can't survive in the wild without my tribe. And then there's the fear of success, which people might say, well, why would I possibly fear success? Well, for those who have had massive success, you know that once you succeed, you might be afraid that you can't repeat it, or that you're going to now have to beat that success and it feels too hard. So fear can cause us to procrastinate or distract ourselves with all the things we talked about in the last slide. John Acuff calls procrastination our creative brain on overdrive, because we can imagine all sorts of possible bad outcomes to what we're trying to do, so we put it off. Or we start and then we distract ourselves when we feel uncomfortable. And phone and other distractions can provide a dopamine hit, which makes us feel good. But interestingly enough, in the long run, the satisfaction of accomplishing something, even when it's hard, is better in the long term, because it releases positive hormones too, and they're longer lasting. The only problem is they're like the logs when you go to start a fire, and dopamine is like the kindling. So dopamine lights up immediately, doesn't take any time to kick in, and the logs take a little longer to light up. So sometimes we don't feel the effects as quickly as we do with an instant dopamine hit from likes on our Instagram post. But the long run results, the long-term results, are so much more satisfying. So our vision and goals have to be compelling enough to overcome that fear or the disempowering story. And everybody has this fear. Successful business owners know how to deal with the fear. They learn to live with it. They even lean into the fear. Now, one way you can combat this, besides having strong vision and goals, is to create an alter ego for yourself. Todd Herman wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect, and he talks about this in his entire book. He mentions people like Lady Gaga, who created the persona of Lady Gaga so she would have the guts to go out and get gigs in the cutthroat environment in New York City when everybody was trying to do the same thing. Elite athletes do this all the time. Steve Jobs did it. That's why he wore a black turtleneck and black pants, so that he didn't have to think about what he was going to wear every day and waste mental energy, but also so when he put on the costume, he was becoming the persona of Steve Jobs, the creator. Now, all these alter egos are not somebody other than us entirely. They are the best version of ourselves, the most courageous version of ourselves, the toughest version of ourselves. It's not characteristics we don't have. It's putting them and magnifying them and minimizing the parts that are maybe weaker or more scared. So if you want to wear the shirt or the hat or some kind of other bracelet thing that's under your shirt or whatever it is, or give yourself a name like Lady Gaga did, whatever works for you, you can just try it. And I'm sure it will pay some dividends. Now, Stephen Pressfield talks about this too in his book of The War of Art. And he says that the more important your work is to you, the more resistance kicks in. And he gives it resistance with a capital R as if it's a person. Resistance tells you you're no good, like the evil twin brother or sister. The War of Art is a very short book. You can read it very quickly. And so I would suggest you read it and keep it in your library and refer to it when you need it and go back. Because you can't get rid of resistance. It comes along for the ride for anybody who does anything that matters to them. And your alter ego can definitely help to fight that resistance. And also letting it talk and talk back to it. Show it doesn't have all the power. It's not in the driver's seat. And here's a big one that he talks about. Do the work anyway. Make work a habit. Be a professional. Show up because it's your job. Not because you're inspired today, not because you have all the time in the world, or not because you want certain results, but because this is what you do day in and day out. Now, this approach to the work is at least as important as all the efficiency hacks in the world, because execution is what matters, not intent. And professionals know this, and they just keep going, no matter how they feel. Now, there's yet another reason why a system and a plan might not work. And it might be that there's some part of the work that you're not good at and really don't like. So if you're anything like me, what you do is you keep doing what you do best and skipping the parts you don't like or you're not good at. So for example, you keep coming up with new ideas when the idea stage was about a month ago. Or you keep asking new questions about your market. In other words, do more market research and evaluate what you got out of that research when you did that actually 6 months ago. Or you talk about what you're doing to everyone you know and you don't actually do it because talking about it is more interesting. Or you just want to be done because you like to work, and you're not really sure if you're working on the right thing because you didn't stop to check first and evaluate whether it was the most critical priority. So you're just working away, checking stuff off your list. Now, there may be other things like this that you find, oh, that sounds like me. I'm kind of like that. I find myself going back to the same things over and over, like I'm going to rewrite this blog post for the 10th time. So what we need to do is find a way to compensate for this. The fact that we all have a weakness somewhere that's either something we aren't good at or something that really drains our energy and that we resist at all costs. One way to do that is to find people with different strengths from us. And if we can't do that, then we have to find a way to get stuff done ourselves. Some ways you can do that is to give yourself permission to not enjoy something. To tell yourself, I really do hate this, and I'm going to reward myself when I'm done. Another thing you can do is use that when principle I talked about to choose a time when you're not already exhausted to do the stuff that drains your energy. Because if you're already tired and this is going to drain your energy, now you'll be so exhausted you won't want to do anything for the rest of the day. A third option is to turn it into a game and use your competitive personality to figure out how to turn something into fun when it would otherwise be a drag, or at least a reward if you get it done. Or this has worked for people I know, and I'm going to try this soon. Schedule a virtual work session with other people who are doing stuff they don't like, and then schedule a break every 45 or 50 minutes and pat yourselves on the back for getting it done, and then go back to work for however long you've scheduled. And lastly, you can limit the time you spend on the activities that drain you. Budget a certain amount of time, and then when that's over, you can say, thank goodness that's over, and follow it up with something you actually like to do. So now I want you to think about yourself. You've heard all this, you've heard all the reasons why we don't get things done, from things that are systemic to things that are efficiency related to things that go deeper into our psyche. So ask yourself these questions. When I'm not getting the important work done, how much of it is because I don't have the best plan? Or how much of it is because I'm not actually scheduling the work anywhere on my calendar or planner? How much of it is coming from inefficiencies because I haven't blocked time into larger chunks, or I'm not minimizing interruptions? How much of it is me postponing the stuff I hate to do and that drains my energy? How much of it is actually fear? And some of you said, you know, it's fear. And perhaps what you've found as you've heard me talking, that there's more than one reason. So I'll share mine. I do have more than one reason. Most of us probably do. The first one is I definitely avoid my weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses is finishing, because I'm a highly creative person and I am ready to move on when my project is about 75% done, because I'm bored already. Because I'm no longer doing the creative work. Now it's the stuff I really don't like to do. So in order for me to get stuff done, I have to tell myself what I just told you. I have to gamify it, or I need to create a streak and check it off and say I did this every day until it was done, or I need to reward myself to do the stuff I don't like. Doing stuff we don't like comes with the territory. We don't start a business so we can just do what we love all day, although many of us might, but we find out very quickly that there's always stuff we don't like to do. So that's definitely one of mine. The second one is not anything I talked about, but I'm calling it rebellion. I spent my entire corporate career with my life being scheduled by other people. I often was triple booked for meetings because people didn't look up when I was free and they expected me to be at all three at the same time. And so I was always letting people down, and it was very stressful. I traveled when they said I had to, even when it wasn't convenient, when I was on crutches, when I had just had surgery, when I was sick. So what happens to me is I am by nature kind of a person who likes to get stuff done. So I put stuff on my calendar and I stick to it and I do this for a while. And then my rebellious streak kicks in because I go, you know what? I did this for 35 years and I'm sick of it. So then I just don't put anything on my calendar. I decide to wing it. And then I start not getting anything done, or what it is not the most important things. And so then I alternate between scheduling and winging it. And that's not necessarily in my best interests. And the third one is what all of us share to some degree or other, and that's the fear thing. So what do we do with it? Sometimes I overcome it, sometimes I don't. And I'm getting better as I learn more skills to work with fear, which is why I'm sharing this with you today. When you do a self-analysis like I did, and you know what stops you from getting the most important stuff done, you can learn how to deal with it. You can push past the roadblocks. So give yourself some time to think and pay attention to how you feel as you work. Feel that resistance and then vow to deal with it head on, as opposed to ignoring it and pretending it's not there. Create an alter ego and forgive yourself when you give in to distractions or frustrations or whatever the list is, because it's okay. We're all human after all. We can't be efficient 100% of the time. And as I used to say to my coworkers when they would say, gosh, I just feel like we're being treated like machines. Even machines have to be rebooted every once in a while. So, what comes next? I already gave you some homework, which is to do a self-analysis. But what comes next after this workshop immediately is that you'll get an email with a link to the replay. And you can study it, and you can borrow any of the techniques that you would like. You can come to the next workshop on managing all the other stuff in your business that Steve will be teaching, which is 2 days from now. Because, as I said, we like to do what we like to do and not so much the other stuff. And the other stuff's important as well. You can practice what you've learned and even practice with a friend and hold each other accountable. You can look through the resources that I will send you and do further study. And another great resource is a SCORE mentor. If you already have a SCORE mentor, wonderful. And if you don't have a SCORE mentor, you don't necessarily need to, but we're going to ask you if you want one. So Steve's going to put up a poll to ask you if you have a mentor, and if not, if you'd like to work with one. If you say, I don't have a mentor and I don't want to work with one, that's the end of it. If you say, I don't have a mentor and I would love to work with a mentor, we will not barrage you. We will send you one email telling you exactly how you can find one to work with to help you through some of these things. It's totally up to you. And if you're already working with a mentor, thank you so much for trusting us to work with your small business. Now, what's next right now is Q&A, otherwise known as questions and answers, and also C, comments. So if you've already been typing your questions in the Q&A box, we will go through those questions. And if you haven't, there's still time to post in there if you want to. If you want to talk in more detail, you can raise your hand and ask to speak, but I would type my question anyway because it would help us have some perspective. And don't forget, if you have a question that's really confidential to your business, if you say it's confidential, we will save it until the recording has been turned off. And with that, we'll end the poll and go for the questions.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. We did have a few come in. One was about the name of the earlier book that you mentioned about the art of managing time. Do you remember which one that was? I know you mentioned
the one that was called When by Daniel Pink.
Okay, Monica, hopefully that helps you. We did get a question early on when you were going through the Pew Matrix, when you were talking about kind of the different ways to rank things. Gail had asked if there was an example that kind of showed how that would work. And I don't know if that's something that somebody could find online, maybe like an Excel spreadsheet or something.
Yes, and if we don't have a lot of questions, I could actually do one after most of the questions are done because I do have it in Excel and we could make something up as we go.
Okay, that might be helpful. So we did get a few questions from one of the other attendees, mostly around kind of some of the questions are a little longer, so I'll try to come up with a short way to describe it here. But the first one was around somebody who's very high on the creativity side, having a hard time getting things completed, just getting distracted, kind of diving into things online. Any steps that you can recommend to kind of honoring your gift of creativity, but also being productive, because those things sometimes can be at odds with each other. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I don't know if you have any ideas for that one.
The first thing is use your creativity to come up with ways to make it more fun to get it done. In other words, we tend to block things of this is creative, this is boring. But if we can, one, if we can see the creativity required to accomplish something, or two, if we can creatively come up with a way to turn it into a game for ourselves, or a puzzle for ourselves, or a mystery, or something that engages with our creative mind, then we're more likely to get it done. That's definitely true for me. And thirdly, if I just say, suck it up, Kathleen, do this for 20 minutes, and then you get to do the creative thing afterwards and do it as a sandwich, creative, boring, creative, then I'm more likely to get it done too. So speaking as a creative, those are things I've used for myself to try and kind of game the system so that I don't just keep avoiding the non-creative stuff. But part of the problem is, if you're a creative idea person, which is I am, we often come up with new ideas that sound more attractive than the one we're working on. And we have to resist that tooth and nail, because the likelihood is it isn't better. It's just new. And it's the fun of coming up with the ideas. So in that case, what I do is keep a journal of all my ideas, and I just stick it in there. And then I go back and I say, I'm going to allow myself to go back to it later, but I'm not going to let that stop me from what I'm doing, because I could just so easily just start on the whole new idea. I've done it. I've changed my business 3 or 4 times completely, thinking, oh, this idea is better than that idea was. That sounds way more fun. So yeah, if you're an idea creative, that's the worst. And it's really easy to just get caught up in that cycle, and it's not going to get you anywhere. So definitely stick it in a drawer, and so you can't see it, or the proverbial virtual drawer.
Okay, those are good advice. So we did get a couple other questions from that same attendee. I think you've covered a lot of this. You talked about kind of ways to kind of take 20 minutes off and do something that's fun as you're going through, a difficult task or difficult, part of a project. And then also just trying to accept what you're good at, but also recognizing what you need to focus on to improve. So for that attendee, if we haven't covered those questions, please feel free to add something else. And Kathleen, were you going to say something? And I thought maybe we could do an example of that.
Yes.
Matrix.
I talk about this in the time management workshop that I give in another setting. And this was coined by Adam Grant, or at least he put it in his book, and it's called creative procrastination. And this is where you start on something and you flesh it out enough so you've got a direction that you're headed. And then you purposely stop working on it. Now, you might stop working on it because you get stuck. If you get stuck, do not force yourself to continue sitting there staring at the page or whatever, the screen. It usually doesn't work. Doesn't mean you stop working entirely necessarily, but you stop working on that. So what he says is, and the research proved this out because he did not believe it when he heard about it, is that creative procrastination starts working on something and then stops, and then does something non-work related. Go for a walk, do the dishes, cook, whatever. Break for the day, do something else. And when you come back to it, you will have more ideas than you would have had if you had kept going. And the reason is because your subconscious mind, you have opened a loop in your mind, a problem, so to speak. Whenever you have a problem that you're working on, it's an open loop, and your brain does not like open loops. So what it does is it tries to close the loop. Even when you're not consciously thinking about it, unconsciously, it is trying to figure out ways to solve the problem. And so when you come back to it the next day or whenever, you have all these more ideas. This totally happened for the workshop I'm giving tonight somewhere else. And I sat there staring at it, trying to come up with ideas, an outline. It was just stuck. I just kept getting stuck at the same point. I said, okay, I'm stopping. I'm going to stop for 2 days. Not going to think about it. Not going to do anything. And I came back to it and it was like, it all just fell into place. So that definitely works. And I think it's a big part of knowing ourselves well enough to know that, is it just that we're not showing up and we're avoiding something, or is it actually a breaking point where we need to stop and regroup, so to speak.
No, it's great advice. I'm in the same work, even working on the presentation I'm doing on Wednesday. I was spending some time on it the other day, and I kind of hit my point where I was like, I'm not going to get any more out of my brain today. I need to put this down for a little bit and come back to it tomorrow. So definitely can relate to that. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A box. We still have a few minutes. Did you want to share an example of the Pew matrix?
I can. There we go. Okay. So let's just make it easy. Let's say I want to buy a house. And I say, what's important to me? The town. The number of bedrooms. I need enough for my family and an office. Good physical condition. I'm just going to stop there because we're pressed for time. And then I have stuff like minimal lawn work and stuff like that. Okay. So now I go the town. Does that matter the most to me? If I have young children and they're in school and they're going to go to public school, that might get a high number. So I'm going to give it a 7. 4 bedrooms. Do I care if a couple kids have to share a bedroom or not? Maybe that's not quite as important as the town. So but it's still important to me. So I'm going to give it a 5. And then is it in good physical condition? I'm good at fixing stuff. So, that's not as important. I'll give it a 2. Again, personal. Myself, I'd give that one a 7 because I can't fix anything. All right, so the maximum is 7, 5, and 2. So the highest anything can get is actually 7 times 7, 5 times 5, 2 times 2. So now I give option 1. The first house I look at. Oh, great. I don't know what I did with this. I did this like 6 years ago, so I'm not sure how this is going to work. So say the town doesn't quite meet up. It's not a 7. The town's okay, but so I'm going to give it a 4. Yeah, it's not letting me pick it. Okay, that's not going to work. Yep, never mind. So if I gave it a 4, what would happen is it would multiply 7 by 4 and it would give it a 28 rather than 49. And so my total score would be less. So what happens is every time I look at house number 1, house number 2, house number 3, and I weigh them against the choices, the maximum score, and if it's as good, then great. And if it's not as good, then I give it a lower score. It's going to give me a lower number. You will definitely find, if you Google this, there will be instructions on how to do this that are way better than what I just gave you. But that's basically the gist of how it works. And I hope that's helpful.
All right, that's great. I think just being able to see kind of how you can put the labels in and then drop numbers in. Like you said, people can Google for this. I just Googled it a little while ago, and there's Excel templates out there, so folks can check that out if they're interested in learning more how to do that. So
yep. Just know it's called a Pew matrix.
Yep. All right. Well, we're a little bit past 1 o'clock, so we should probably wrap it up with there.
We're going to turn off the recording shortly, but before we do, I want to thank you all for coming today and remind you that we will send you a link to the recording of this session and that you can go see it, go see a replay if you want. And there are a whole bunch of other videos on our YouTube channel. So while you're there, you might want to subscribe so you get notified of anything new that comes up. And with that, we will say goodbye and turn off the recording.